some questions that I can ask myself to get to kind of the one thing I want to say. Okay, what is my purpose? Everything you do, you should start. What is my purpose? Before I send an email to the staff, what is my purpose? Before I write a letter to ex-congressperson or, members of parliament, is for you guys, whatever it is, what is my purpose? Why am I doing this? Because that will help you identify if you are trying to describe a policy, if you are just trying to stand on a rooftop and yell and scold them for their bad decision, or, be a self-righteous statement, or is it actually try to move the needle on something to persuade people? You need to identify your purpose. If my audience walks away remembering one thing that I said, because they will only remember one thing, or if they read this email and remember one thing, what would it be? What is the one thing that you want them to think or believe or feel or do after they receive the message you're giving them? If the newspaper were to write a headline about this piece of communication, what would that headline be? So to learn about your audience, who are they? First of all, who are your audiences? And which ones how would you rank your audiences in terms of priority? How would you prioritize them in a world of, who really needs to hear what message and who needs to hear it first, right? So thinking really strategically about that. What are their incentives? Because we all know that everybody's incentives are very different. And you need to be really brutally honest with yourself about what people's incentives are. What do they care about? What are their values? What are they carrying with them? Emotionally, historically, psychologically, intellectually, what are they bringing? Because that stuff is really important and very often is overlooked in term, and it has huge implications, I think, for how these conversations go. And so if I'm talking to somebody who is liberal on gun safety, I might say we should care about people's safety, right? Like this is not fair that we should have all this gun violence and some people have guns and they're shooting schools up, or don't we worry about people? Okay. But that might be persuasive to liberals, but it might not be persuasive to conservatives. What if I'm talking about gun safety laws to a conservative audience, and instead of using the care or fairness argument, I use the authority argument, and I say, unfettered gun use and gun access undermines law enforcement. It makes law enforcement less safe. It hinders their authority over communities to keep communities safe. Well, maybe that might be a little bit more persuasive to them than the care argument that we typically make, because that's speaking to their values. What is the status quo? What is the problem that I am trying to solve, world as it is? And then you need to lay out what your solution to that problem is, what you're proposing, and what could be, if we implemented your solution, the world as it should be. So you've got the world as it is and the world as it should be. And you want to make that gap as wide as possible in certain contexts, especially for, say, funders, between the undesirable status quo and the incredible future you're proposing, because you want people to reject the status quo so thoroughly, to say, we absolutely cannot stand for this, we have to go for this. And throughout the story, you are making the status quo as unappealing as possible in order to make your solution not just desirable, but kind of obvious. I would urge you to think about communications on a kind of curve. So here's how I think about it. If it's like a bell curve, and up here, you've got your values: freedom, justice, equality, love. And then on the other sort of plane, the other end of the curve, is details. The bloody knife, the tattered flag, the tear-stained cheek. And then in the middle is jargon. And jargon is where meaning goes to die. Jargon is innovating technologies to accelerate transformational synergies. It's collateral damage, employee reduction activities. You fall into this and you land into the pit of alligators. And what your job as a communicator is to traverse between values and details, kind of jump back and forth between that, building a bridge over jargon and never falling into it.